Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Renew Podcast. I am your host, Kristen Andre, and with me today, we have Mr. Derek Distin, and we are going to be talking about all things leadership and culture.
This is exciting. I'm
excited because I love talking about corporate stuff, and I think it has changed so much since we've been in the business world. Years ago, business and life, and you just showed up to the office, you clocked in, you clocked out. We didn't really get to be our own personalities. And now I think we're starting to see that emerge a little bit.
Oh, and I would say it's not just, let's take the last 2 years out of it, right? This COVID pandemic called the post-COVID
Yes,
world,
I'm
right?
out of the pandemic. I decided last week, I'm done with it.
But even just removing that, looking back 10, 15 years, you can look at the generational thing. You can say the millennials, the Xennials, Gen X, whatever. The workplace has changed.
Yes.
It is no longer leave yourself at home, come into work, be work you, clock out, go home and be you.
So
right?
when did you, you said the last few years it changed, I agree, and even longer. So tell us a little bit about you and kind of how you got into studying this and what you do and all that type of stuff. Tell us about Derek.
Tell us about you. Well, first of all, I got to tell you, this is a weird chair to be in. I'm usually sitting in the host chair. I know.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I run a series of internal podcasts at my company. Focus solely internally. Don't go and try and Google it. You're not going to find it. We got it behind the wall.
It's a secret podcast.
It is an absolute secret podcast.
Okay.
Yep. And so this is unusual for me to be sitting on the other side, getting the questions asked of me. You know what? I kind of do too.
I like making people feel uncomfortable.
And I love sitting here with your face behind me.
Nice.
It tells me that.
It's a little scary.
Oh, great. Kristen's going to be asking all the questions. Ooh, here we go. Let's see. When did I start studying this? Well, I would say I never studied it. I'd say I sort of fell into it by accident.
Yeah.
I
think a lot of people do that.
We do.
Yeah.
We do. And it comes by circumstances. And for me, it came with several years ago, a promotion at work. Took over a fairly large department. Now I work in the tech industry, so we are a service department, if you will, IT service, right? You're having problems, you're going to give us a call. My team's going to be the team that would answer the phone. And I took over this department, and we had a great culture as an organization at the time. Now, a little bit of backstory on this. We were a privately held company started by two brothers about 20 years ago now at this point, out of Alpharetta here, and had grown very well as an organization. Certainly dominated the niche industry in which we play. But about 5 years ago, we were purchased by a private equity group. Now, with that, obviously you've got those initial fears of great. Organizational culture is going to change. What's going to happen?
Well, you worry about that a lot with private equity coming in and taking over companies.
Right. And at the time, I didn't understand the difference. You sort of tell the story of venture capitalist versus private equity. One is looking for the quick hit return. That's where you're going to turn and burn. Just take all the assets, sell them out. Private equity tends to be a little bit more, no, we're looking for a longer term investment. You hear that 5-year plan a lot with private equity. They see something that could be valuable, perhaps a little bit more valuable with some investment, some money behind it, and they're going to turn around and try and make that investment. That's where we were.
Was it scary for your team to have a group coming in and worried what they were going to do to the culture? Because tech, you said you're in tech.
Yes.
I don't normally, my background's finance. So when I think of tech firms, I don't normally think of culture. And I could be because I'm thinking they're more techie. They're more in their heads and not really thinking about all this woo-woo, frou-frou stuff with culture.
You see the software guy in your head, or you hear
that's totally what I'm envisioning. And I'm not dissing the software guy, but it's a different breed sometimes.
Oh my goodness, it is. And so, backstory a little bit further on it. The acquisition happened right around the same time that I took this new position. So I had been in account management, if you will, client success manager. So I had 40, 50 firms that I was in charge of. And different than account management as you might think about it, where I wasn't out there seeking and soliciting additional upsells for them. I was in charge of their success. That's how we had it structured. The client success managers at our company, their job is to make sure that the firms, the clients that we have are taken care of, everything that they need, sort of white glove treatment. So there was a lot of liaisoning work that I did between our service department, our infrastructure, the tech heavy side of things, and the client. I sort of sat at this nexus where I always said I'm half client employee, half eccentric
Which
employee.
I think is good because that pulls everybody
Right.
together. Because a lot of companies forget about the client sometimes.
And what it does is it gives the client a voice inside the company. Hey,
Yes,
I've got
which
this
is
problem.
good.
I'm going to run it up the flagpole. It's that escalation that I need, and I'm not getting response. Contact your CSM. Great. I know who to talk to internally. I can prioritize. And a lot of times you get those, this is a P1 emergency. It's the worst thing in the world. We're burning down. Really? You can't print to that printer. That's
That's
not the worst thing in the world.
I've seen worse things happen to companies and people.
Yeah.
But all right. So you had all these, but like, was culture a thing before?
So it wasn't. Again, organizationally, we had a culture.
Okay.
We
I
had
think
been-
all organizations have a culture.
They do,
Some
and
are just bad.
we had a strong culture because the two brothers who founded the company, very strong, devout Christians.
Yep.
So they had brought in this culture of caring for everybody, right? You want to make sure that you're looking after your brother, and everybody pitched in. And so as the organization grew, when they started, they hired people who fit a mold of I can do a lot, and I'm not opposed to doing a lot. I'll take over, and sure, you need some help on that. I don't know anything about it, but I'm going to jump in and I'm going to help because it's going to help you out. It's going to help him out. It's going to help her out. It's going to help them out. Ultimately, it's going to help everybody out.
So the culture was helping.
Exactly.
Okay.
Culture was
That's
absolutely
a
helping.
good thing for a culture to be built on.
Right. So drawbacks from that, as you grow, suddenly you begin to worry about people getting spread a little bit too thin,
Yep.
or you get some that ideal candidate that you're looking for becomes a little bit more difficult to find because as you've grown, you've had to specialize a little bit more. So you're no longer finding the person who can be the jack of all trades because now you need somebody with a specific skill set and knowledge. And so it becomes more difficult to hire if you're still looking for what you might have as a perfect candidate, right?
Yep. Well, with tech, I would think you've got a lot more specifics where other companies or other industries you may not, because I'm a big believer in hiring for culture.
Right.
I mean, I would hire for culture over skill set pretty much any day because I feel like I can teach skill,
Right.
but I can't necessarily teach somebody to be a fit with my culture.
Right. And so that becomes the issue, and that became I don't want to say it was a problem because it really wasn't a problem, but it was a concern. So we get acquired late 2017, early 2018. And it was right as I was accepting a promotion. So I was moving from that CSM position to take over our service department, promoted to service manager at the time. About 34 people in the department, fairly large sized department. In fact, it was the largest department within the organization at the time. We were only about 100, 110 employees. But
It's still a good sized company, though.
it was. And that was part of what attracted the private equity group to us is they've done very well. They seem to be a mid-sized business, if you will. We were severely understaffed. We were under-resourced. But again, it came back to that. There's a lot of people chipping in, doing a lot of things.
Yep.
And the growth trajectory that we wanted would not have been sustainable with everybody burning themselves, candle at both ends, if you will. And so we looked at this and said, okay, great. The department that we have that we can control was service. And so we started sitting down and saying, what are the cultural bits that we want to absolutely maintain?
Okay.
And what are the things that we say, that's such a nice to have, but is that going to provide or cause problems for us as we continue to try to grow?
Oh, so I'm curious on those
Right.
because I think a lot of times people will agree about, like, here are the things cultures need to have. What were the ones that you thought were like, we could take it or leave it?
Well, so I'll get to that. What we did was sit down with the leadership, so the managers and the directors, sort of what you would call mid to high level management. Yep. And again, decent sized organization, I'd classify it as small decent, if you will, 100 people. We sort of sat down and started looking around at each other and we said, let's be real honest. What are the things that make us who we are? And what are the things that are a byproduct of the people? Because the things that make us who we are foundational. And those are the things that we want to keep.
Yes.
That ability to help and be helped. Not just to reach out, but to ask for help.
Okay.
Right? So I'm not just going to look for people who are needing help, but I need to be willing to say, I need help.
I think that's a big thing. I think more people should do that for sure.
It is, but it's tough because it comes with an ego, especially in an industry like you said with tech, where it is I'm supposed to know the answer to everything. I'm super smart, right? A lot of people get into tech and flourish, do it because they have a very specific skill set or knowledge.
Well, that's why I was mentioning the tech
Right.
industry, because I feel like it's all, a lot of it's in your head, and
It
you're
is.
not taking time for the emotion. And I don't think we had a comment on the live, Ray saying that give them somebody with passion, the energy. And when
Yes.
I think of tech, I don't necessarily see that, the oomph and the,
And that's one of the hardest things to hone in on and find that passion, because people are passionate. So the question becomes, what defines passion? Am I passionate about my job? Am I passionate about this code that I wrote? What
are
is
people passionate about code? I get
it?
I bet they're passionate
you
about
have
code.
no idea. People
It's so funny. I can't even turn on my computer on most days, so I'm not a techie person.
And if you're the person who wrote the code to turn on your computer and someone else said to you, hey, I think we need to change it. No, that's my baby.
That's true.
That-
Okay,
that's where the passion
I get
comes.
that. Okay.
So we sat down and we started looking around and saying, great, so helping and being a helpful culture is definitely one of the things that we want. One of the other things that we identified that we hadn't really realized is we needed critical thinking
Okay.
to be a big part of our culture, because that goes hand in hand with helping.
Wouldn't you think that goes critical thinking? I would think would be something everybody needs. I think the world has lost critical thinking at this point because there's some morons running around out there. But isn't critical thinking? Doesn't every company?
I think every
Think of
company
that?
should.
I do too.
I don't think every company does.
I don't think every person does,
No.
but I agree.
But critical thinking is important, particularly in an industry like tech. I mean, it's important in just about any industry, but let's focus on tech for a second because, as I was mentioning before, you write a piece of code, something that gets, we call it push to production. It's out there, it's live in the world. Our clients are using it. Well, now you get promoted to a different department, or you get sent, on a project. You're not in the office for whatever reason. You've either left, been promoted, on PTO, whatever, and a problem goes wrong. Something goes wrong. Suddenly, other folks need to start looking at that code, if you will, in this case, and say, well, what's going on? Why is this not doing what it's supposed to do? The widget isn't working.
Yep.
Why? And if you are two heads down and not wanting to critically think about what it is, you'll just look at it and say, well, that's Bob's problem. We need to wait for Bob to get back in the office. Or you'll throw your hands up and go, I have no idea because I'm scared to look at that. And that's where the lack of critical thinking comes in.
Yeah.
If you have that culture of, I'm willing to take a look at this and think about it, that fear of looking at that code changes. And it becomes, you know what? Absolutely, I'll
Let's
dive into
figure it
that.
out.
Exactly. Let's figure it
So
out.
regardless, and I think the make it figure outable is a thing with culture. No matter the industry that you're in, we have to figure out how to solve problems, because at the end of the day, that's what most companies are doing. I mean, your company is not successful whether you have a product or a service unless there's a problem you're solving.
Well, look at yourself. You don't exist as a business entity because there's no problems for you to solve.
Right.
You exist because people come to you and say, Kristen, I need help
lots
with
of
X,
problems.
Y, or Z.
Right.
Right, exactly. And it could be the smallest problem. It could be, like you said, a lot of problems.
Right.
But you exist to solve a problem. Every company exists to solve a problem. Now, we can talk, innovation and red ocean, blue ocean strategies. We could talk a lot of stuff for hours on various episodes of podcast about this. But in the end, what you're doing, the product you're providing, a service or an actual physical product, is solving a problem for someone.
But it goes back to your 2 points. I think at least me, and obviously I'm service related, it's critical thinking and it's passion.
Right.
It's I will dive in and really try to think through, okay, what does this problem need? What do we need to do? And then I get super excited and passionate about solving it. And I think those are two of the variables you mentioned that every company needs.
Right. So we looked at this again and started pulling apart and teasing some of this out and saying, really, truly, this exists because it's foundational. We absolutely need to have this as an organization for us to continue to have the culture that has allowed us to succeed. And then there were things that were byproducts of it. We used to have, as an example, again, we're a tech company, sort of very high tech, if you will. Nerf gun fights exploded throughout the office every so often.
No way, are you serious?
No joke.
That would be fantastic.
It was Silicon Valley without as much of the comedy
Well,
that
I
gets
do
written
think
into
of that with tech, because like you see all the things
Right.
about the foosball tables
Oh,
and
yeah.
the
foosball, shuffleboard, ping
Yeah.
pong. At any time you could call into the office and you would probably hear a ping pong ball bouncing
I
around in the
think
background.
that's awesome.
It was great. But that was a byproduct of the people. So we had to say to ourselves, is having a ping pong table part of our culture, or does that flow out of the people that we hire?
Okay.
And we realized that if you were to say, yes, we're going to be a fun office to work at, that's not going to be enough. You need to have the people be the reason folks want to come into the office.
Well, for sure, because otherwise you're just going to have people coming in and playing ping pong all day and
Right.
not doing their job.
Right. Or let's say that you come into the office and you don't like the job, you're not passionate about it. That ping pong table is no longer going to draw you after a couple of months.
Right.
You're not going to want to be there anymore just so you can play ping pong. You're going to go find somewhere else where you can feel motivated, passionate about doing your work.
Well, and you said we were talking about, I know with companies, it's the people, and you mentioned this to me before, it's the people that build the culture. It's the people that disrupt things. It's the people that create change and all of this growth that we're seeing.
Right. Companies don't disrupt.
Right.
Companies don't make changes.
I loved when you said that.
People do.
Yeah.
Yes. It's the person. The fundamental unit of change is the individual. Fundamental unit of growth is the individual. Think about a tree. Think about yourself. You're not growing.
Yep.
Your cells are growing.
Yep.
The tree is not growing. The branches are growing. And the branches are growing, or the sprouts are coming out because the cells are going through the growth. The fundamental unit of change is the individual.
I love that. So, but that's why it's so important to look at when we think of culture. You know, we talk about a company's culture, an office culture, but it's really how the individual people in that make it up. And I know you're like me, you're an assessment junkie and like to look at all these types of things to dive into the individual.
Right.
I mean, I feel like I'm a big believer in strengths. I love the Strengths Finder by Gallup organization. I use it with all my clients. I love it. But that goes to the individual.
Right.
It goes to what is this person naturally good about? Where do they find some passion? Where do they find their energy? And I think to the extent we can build that up in a person, then collectively, that's what builds a good culture.
Exactly. Again, it's
do you guys do a lot with the individual, I would assume?
We do. And this is where in mid 2018, we started to make the changes. So there was a lot of fear, trepidation going on right at the beginning of 2018. Again, I stepped into this position, and there were a lot of people who were very hesitant. Oh my gosh, we've got suddenly corporate overlords.
Yep.
You know, Trey and Christian, the two brothers who started the company, we know they're going to go at some point, right? This is what always happens. You sell the business.
They got scared.
Go through.
Yeah,
No, you go
the
through.
employees got scared.
Exactly. And so you can only tell people so much things won't change. Or things will change, but they're going to be for the better. You can only say that so much.
Because people aren't believing you anyway until they see it.
Until they see it. That's exactly it. So we had to sit down and we started taking a look at things and saying, what is going to change, what isn't going to change? And let's be honest with people, right? This is probably going to change, but here's why. And I have another saying that I use quite often with everybody. In the absence of information, you get confusion. And confusion is when people begin to draw on their fears, project those stories out, and then live out those stories and make decisions months in advance, not even sure about what's coming down the pipeline. They'll decide, I don't like where this is heading. Yep. I think this is going to happen, so I'm going to start looking for a new job now. Because again, someone walks out the door, they give you their 2 weeks notice. They didn't make that decision that day. They did it 3-4 months ago. They've usually got something lined up. They've been interviewing for months. Right. So we looked at this and we said, what are the things that we need to really hone in on? One was information processing, meaning we needed to talk to let people know these are the things that are going to change. And there were some organizational, cultural changes that we went through, policies that we had to change. Now, I would argue some of them needed to be changed because they worked in 2000, 2005. They didn't work in a 2018 world. Wow. So we started making some of these policy changes, but explaining to people about here's the why. It's never an edict. It's not command and control. Boom, this is what it is. Now go do it. It's, hey guys, this is what we're thinking about doing. Here's the reason why. Because once people understand the why, now I'm getting into some Simon Sinek territory here.
I love me some Simon Sinek. That's good by me.
Once someone understands the why, they're far more willing to accept a decision or, more appropriately, voice an opinion about it. Okay. Because as leaders, we're taught the lie that we have to know the answer to everything, and therefore every decision we make is final. It's got to be done, and it's got to be the right thing. You get one shot at it. I'd argue that the truth is leaders should be the ones who are first to say, guys, I don't know. So I'm asking your thoughts and opinions on this. We need to do it because if you get buy-in from your team, no matter how small or large it is, people will help drive that decision
I agree.
forward.
And we had another comment on the feed on Facebook. We've got Ray says we want to feel like we're making a difference. Like we're one of the reasons the company's growing. They want to feel bought in and understand like, hey, I'm part of this culture. I'm part of this decision. I'm part of the growth.
Right.
Because people want to feel needed.
You want to feel invested.
Yeah.
You want to feel...
Well, because you're spending so much time and energy there.
Look, it used to be 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week.
It did? I seem to miss that memo. I think since I've been in the working world, except for maybe a couple side jobs in college, I don't know that I've ever...
I was trying to think about the
that.
last time I worked 40 hours a week, and I don't know that I ever could say
I
that.
think I worked 40 hours the week I took a vacation. I was probably down to about 40
Well,
hours
I would say,
that week.
I'd argue and say I work 40 hours every week, and then another 30 to 40 on top of that.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly.
So we explained to people, here's what's going on. And we were very fortunate. The group that made the acquisition had recently purchased another company out of Hudson, New Hampshire, so the northeast area. And so it was more of a merger than a true purchase and acquisition. The two companies kind of came together.
That's harder, I think.
Culturally, though, there was a reason they did it. Both companies had a very similar background. Two people started each company, focused in tech. We both played in the same market, right around the same size, roughly 100, 150 employees for each company. So bringing the two companies together became an effort of, hey, you're not lower than us. We're not higher than you. We don't, corporately, you're not reporting to us, et cetera. It became a merger. And so they did a really good thing. And that was a lot of transfer of people. Not transferring jobs, but a lot of movement back and forth. We'd have managers from sister departments come down and spend time with us. We'd send people up to New Hampshire, spend time up there. So you got to know the folks on both sides of the company with the private equity group in the background saying, hey guys, you're 6 months in, what do you need?
I think that's important in a culture is getting to know the people.
Right.
Because a lot of times we, like back to our points earlier about the differences in folks and their strengths and their, however they show up on an assessment, you really got to get to know folks and understand. I'm a big person on trying to understand the person and where they're coming from and why they think the way they do and why they react the way they do, because people aren't, as much as I'd like everybody to be like me, there probably would be a really scary world we'd be living in, but people are different and they show up to work different.
Well,
and you got to know them.
I think that's your Enneagram 8 coming through.
That's right. See, that about me is that I am the Enneagram. And for those of you guys listening that have done the Enneagram, I'm curious. So if any of you guys, I know a couple of you guys that are watching the live, I can see some names pop up, and I know y'all are assessment junkies too. I'd be curious on the Enneagram. So, I don't know as much. It's my newer one. I'm a StrengthsFinder fanatic. Okay. And my StrengthsFinder are spot on. Mm-hmm. And I love that because I think there's no right or wrong with the StrengthsFinder. Like everything is just like, this is what you're naturally good at. Let's cultivate these gifts. With the Enneagram, which I'm starting to learn more about, and I know you study this more, I'm an 8 on the Enneagram, which for a female is not what you want to be. You are labeled the I can't say it, but the word that rhymes with a witch and starts with a B, that is how we're labeled. And so I just am like, oh, I'm direct and assertive, but that's probably not the characteristics that are
that's a societal thing.
Society's a little whacked with this, I think, because they're trying to hold me down. I'm an 8.
Because it's because people don't critically think about what an 8 can bring.
A lot of really good stuff. So, you're surrounded by 8s. I know that.
I kind of feel the bearing down on the back of my neck right now. My wife's an 8.
I do know that.
My wife's an 8.
I know your wife's an 8.
But
that's why I like her so much.
That's one of the reasons why I like her so much too. I will say this. I'll toss this out. I'll be interested to know for any of your followers right now who are listening in. I'm not going to say what I am on the Enneagram.
Oh, man.
Yet.
Okay.
We'll get to that. But I'd love to know some guesses from some folks before this podcast is over.
Okay.
So we'll circle back around to that. But the Enneagram, it's interesting that we're talking about it because it's one of the things that we implemented in our internal process within our department. So again, I'm talking service department here, which again, we're talking tech folks, you have this picture in your mind of what a tech geek is.
Yes.
And
Sorry.
I'd love to dispel that, because we had folks who, yes, we had the Dungeon and Dragons, the gamers.
That is totally
Magic
what I
the
was picturing
Gathering.
was the gamers.
Right. I've got folks who are participate in the Georgia brass band.
That's cool.
Yep. I've got athletes. We had several
Athletes I was not picturing.
several D1 athletes who are excellent technicians. We really truly represented a good cross section of society, with one caveat: we did tend to be male.
I was going to
heavy.
guess male. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And that's difficult to address when you're looking for some skill sets.
Hey, Girls Who Code is really big with the teenagers right now, and I think you're going to see that change.
Love it. And we've started to see some of that change.
Good.
But in an effort to address some of that, again, we were not going into full DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion at the time, but we recognized that we were going to go through tremendous growth. The private equity group had said to us, what do you guys need? Here's where we think we can provide some backing. And one of the first things we did was sit down and say, man, our growth numbers over the next year and a half put us at a user count, which is going to equate to X number of tickets per day. And right now, not only are we underwater and understaffed, we will never be able to do that at our hiring model that we have right now. We were on a behind hiring model, which would say basically for every, let's call it 200 users that we onboarded to the company, we'd hire a new technician, which meant if we're already behind, we wouldn't hire until that 201st person.
Yep.
And then we hire, and then for us, it was almost a 4-month training period to get someone up to speed.
But don't you think a lot of companies and tons of industries, we have a staffing shortage, if you will, all over the place. Right. And I've got some reasons and biases as to why I think that's happening, but a lot of companies are behind when it comes to hiring, and sometimes through no fault of theirs.
Well, and it's tough because it's an investment you have to make. You have to make an investment and say, we're not quite ready to see the returns on this right now.
Yep.
But that's exactly what it is it's an investment that will generate returns down the road.
Yes, that's true.
So we knew that we'd be going through a very large onboarding. We basically were going to effectively add 75% to our department. So again, we were about 30 at the time. All of a sudden, we were looking at probably around 55 people by the end of the year. Very strong hiring that we had to do in the latter half of 2018, early 2019, to try and ramp up, which would have been more hires probably than the entire company had in the previous 2 years. And we're talking about for one department. There were other departments that were doing additional hiring.
So y'all were, and this was pre-pandemic then. Right. This was before.
This was still in the office.
Okay.
Yep.
Nice.
So this is where we started looking at and saying, how is our interview process affecting our culture? What parts of our culture do we want to carry through and make sure these are the people that we're looking for? So we threw out the script on our interview process. Very famously in the company, started asking questions that you would never expect to hear in an interview. So for instance, Kristen, you're sitting down across the table from me. Here's the first question, aside from the, hi, I'm Derek, nice to meet you. I say the word orange. What comes to mind first, the color or the fruit?
Fruit.
Why?
Because I like fruit.
Okay.
I mean, I would be terrible at this. This is why I own my own company, because I obviously would not get hired.
So
by another company.
The question is not the orange. It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong answer. What I'm trying to do is prime you to do some thinking.
Okay.
Okay. You said fruit.
Yes.
What was my follow-up question?
You said why.
Why? I want you to start thinking.
Yep.
Too often you get stock answers in interviews, especially for, say,
for sure,
entry-level positions.
I agree with that.
So we said, we're going to start putting the person at ease. And we wanted to ask these questions that were going to generate confusion to get them out of the space of, I need to have a stock answer that's going to get me the job because I'm able to provide exactly this example they're looking for.
Which is what people think going into interviews, especially young people.
Right. And so the other part of it too is we would have 2 to 3 people in there. And I told everybody, we are never shirt and tie. You're never going to be sitting in these interviews with a sport coat on. In fact, I don't want us sitting across the table from the interviewee. We're going to all sit around a round table. If it was there, and we're going to start. I want you guys opening up. So I had 2 different leads who would come into these interviews with me on just about every occasion. We got great rapport. I knew where Tom was going to ask his next question or Andrew was going, and we started getting comfortable. And the whole thing for the first 10 minutes of the interview was to get the other person comfortable as well. Because again, I want to know.
So you start by asking them about an orange? Because that's not comfortable.
It isn't.
I'm sitting here going, why is he asking me about an orange?
But then we turn around and we start asking each other the same questions. And suddenly you're in the same space as the interviewee.
Okay.
And then we would encourage them to ask questions, and not the questions of, well, why should I work here? Or tell me about your benefits package. We're asking these random questions.
Well, I like that too, because I'm very conversational.
Right.
Even when I'm like talking with people that might be prospective clients of mine, or, that come to me to ask about coaching, I like to keep it conversational because I want them to be real. So I agree with that.
So we would ask questions, and we had some fun brain teaser style questions.
I like those.
Things you might have, that you hear Google asks in some of these, high level interviews. For instance, if I sent you up to New York City, an all expenses paid trip for a week.
Yes.
Now you come back.
Sold.
I'm picking you up Friday at the airport. I'm going to have one question for you, Kristen. How many slices of pizza are sold in New York City on an annual basis?
I'm going to say 5 million, and I had about 4.8 of them. Especially on the one right on, I think it's like 8. No, there's some good pizza.
That's why it's New York style, right?
Yeah.
That's great. But
why would you ask me? That's my curiosity is, why would you ask me that question?
So the reason I would ask that question is now I want to start getting you into a critical thinking space, because we'd have people who come back and they said, well, I just Google for the answer. And then we made up this story about the Great Cheese Wars of 1683 that no one ever knows about, but pre-Congress at the time banned discussion of sales of pizza within the 5 boroughs of New York. Right? And you're telling this story that is intentionally ludicrous to get the other person laughing. But what you're trying to do is get them to say, okay, I don't want you to Google. I want you to start telling me about this. And then we tell them, you've got a $10,000 prepaid Visa gift card. In fact, this is yours. You can keep whatever you want at the end of this. Use it to find out whatever answers you want. And then you start getting people who would say, oh, you know what? I'd probably start having pizza for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I'd go to as many different pizza joints as I could. And I'd start just watching. Or I'd start asking people, how many slices of pizza do you sell? How are you finding your way to step yourself through the problem?
So you're wanting people to be able to find answers without Googling.
I want people to be able to think about, if my first option is removed from me, if I have a hurdle in front of me, what am I going to do?
Okay.
And so we would just start playing
I like
these
the
fun
way you
games.
put that. If my first option was, because when you say that, and I do that. I mean, it's a running joke with my kids. They'll ask a question, I'm like, let's go to the Google. We'll go into the Google.
Right.
But I feel
Google
like
killed the bar argument.
It's
Google killed the bar argument. You no longer have that.
Oh, people still have bar arguments. No. But I agree with you, because our natural default now is, let me just Google it. Right. I mean, that happened to me over the weekend. We were talking about different, stats and sports and things like that. And it was like, oh, let me look on Google. Let me go here. So it's either Google or IMDb or my two. I have both apps. I look up everything. Like, what movie was that guy in? I go right to IMDb. Right. So instead of trying to think.
IMDb is probably my 3rd or 4th most visited page on my browsing history too.
Exactly, because you always get. It's so easy to find. That's interesting, because it is so easy to find the answer without us having to think.
Right, and that's the thing, is now everything is there in front of you. Heaven forbid that thing that's in front of you that's supposed to provide the answer isn't available, or doesn't have the answer. Even worse, doesn't have the answer. What are you going to do?
Right.
And so those are the questions that we'd start asking. And I would argue that probably over the course of 3 years, hundreds of interviews, we asked what you would consider to be a tech support style question, on average, maybe 1 to 2 per interview. Now, these interviews will go 60 to 90 minutes.
Okay.
And I'm asking 1 to 2 questions. Well, tell me about what Active Directory does and where does it reside on the Windows server?
I don't even know what that means.
Right.
Yeah.
Someone might.
Yeah, someone might. But that's the person that's got the skill set, but may not have the critical thinking.
Because in the end, what I care about at an entry-level position is your critical thinking. I have training that can teach you the skill sets.
Right.
I can't teach you to think critically. Here's my favorite.
Love that.
Here's the favorite question that we asked folks. And this one, anybody who gave up on this, I don't think we ever hired somebody who gave up on this question.
Okay.
You ever played the game seven questions?
Yes.
Okay. You can ask me yes, no questions. I will only answer yes or no. I'm thinking of an object in the room. What is it? Now, we don't have to go through this game unless you really want to, but it might be a little bit boring for everybody listening.
I like it. Well, yeah, but I know that I wasn't going to guess the water bottle. I wasn't going to guess the water bottle, but I think, all right, so that's good, but it's getting critical thinking because, we talked about that earlier. You can teach skill set.
Right.
I used to say that when I hired people is I can teach you anything about this business. I can't teach you how to work hard, and I can't teach you to have some energy and excitement and to care for people.
Right.
And I can't teach you to critically think.
Right.
I mean, you can learn it, you can adapt it, but I think that is a good skill set.
You have to be open to it. Now, here's why it's even more important as you're building a culture, right? To understand what it is that you're looking for. We're entry-level position in the company, which means, for the most part, we get our best folks taken away from us.
For sure.
Internally.
Yeah, we're plopping those out into better positions.
And I always tell everybody when they came through, my job is to get you promoted out of my department. That's what I used to tell everybody when they come through. My job is to get you promoted out of my department. Now, if you're really good at answering the question of working with a Linux system or some sort of coding, how is that going to translate to a potential job that's going to open up that may be not related?
So with that, it is, the people that are plopped up are the critical thinking people. And so what we want to do is figure out how, like if you are an entry-level person or you're somebody listening and you're going into these new jobs, start thinking about how can I do it takes, really what it's about, it's showing up and doing more than your job. It's doing more than what's asked about you.
Because if you want to progress in your career, there's only so far that you can go with your current skill set.
Yep.
Like we've all had to learn new skills for new jobs. And you want to be stretched and challenged. And if you're not comfortable with that, you're only ever going to be really good at what it is that you currently do.
So as we tie it all together and wrap, what if you were listening, and then I'm going to ask you about your Enneagram, but if you're listening and you're either in a position where you're trying to find a new job, where you're like, I want a career change, as a person that's looking to join a great culture, what two pieces of advice would you have for somebody who's like, I want to be part of a phenomenal place to work where I can grow? What do they need to be thinking about? Not as the interviewer, but as the interviewee.
2 questions. Do you know yourself? What are you really, truly looking for? And that's the first thing. And you have to know yourself. And this is where I say, like for me, going through the Enneagram and getting to know who I was, things that drove me, became critically important. Helped me identify really what I was looking for.
All right. So tell us what you are on the Enneagram and what that type is.
Well, were there any guesses?
I don't have
any
any guesses.
Okay. So I'm a 9.
Okay.
And that is the peacemaker.
Oh.
I avoid conflict naturally at all costs.
I would drive you nuts.
I'm married to an 8.
But I know. I'm saying, bless.
But guess what? I would drive you nuts as well.
You would.
I drive her nuts.
I know.
Yep.
I can pretty much assure you I can pretty much assure you my ex-husband's not. So, sorry.
That's all right. I had to learn that.
I still like you.
I had to learn those things, and thank you. I'm glad.
Well, yeah, because if I didn't, you'd be all stressed out. There'd be conflict.
Last time Derek's on this podcast.
But it's understanding that about people. Yeah. Like, I would try not to tick you off if I knew you were the peacekeeper, unless I wanted to tick you off.
Or understand that my response is going to be based upon my desire naturally to avoid conflict. Now, I've had to learn to lean into that. Every leader, manager, et cetera, has to learn conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. And in life, conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. Guess what?
No.
It took me almost 40 years to recognize that in my life.
Yeah.
Knowing yourself and what you're looking for.
I think that's critical for people. And I think of these assessments like the Enneagram Strengths Finder, that helps with that, which is why I love them so much.
And number 2, understand the culture you're looking for, that you want to be a part of, which comes from who you are. But more importantly, are you willing to be part of a change to that culture, to help direct change if it's not exactly what you want? And cultural change can exist in a subcultural level. A team, call it 6-7 people, within a department, within a division, within an organization, can have its own subculture that differs. Yeah. If you are someone who says, I'm never willing to be part of a change, then you need to spend a lot of time finding that perfect spot. But if you're willing to say 70% of this meets what I want, and I'm willing to help make pushes to change that additional 30%, recognizing I may get 2%, I may get 25%, 28%, you have to ask yourself, who am I, and am I willing to help make a change? Those are the 2 things that will allow you as an interviewee to find the right culture and help make the culture what you want.
I love it. I love it. And we had a comment from Deborah about being invested. And I think those being invested in your company, I think those two questions to ask yourself is a great way to figure out, is this a fit?
Right.
Is this somewhere I could see myself? And honestly, if you're at a company where you're not feeling invested, that's great questions to kind of hold the mirror up and see if this is where you want to grow.
And there's nothing wrong with not being invested as long as you understand that about yourself.
Sure.
If I'm not invested here right now, does that mean it's a temporary thing? Am I just not invested for this period of life? Because if it's a long-term thing and I'm really not invested, you're not happy. You're not doing your job justice. You're probably not doing whoever you're supposed to be taking care of justice, and you're not happy.
Right. And that's the thing is, if you can't be, my bias is life is too short for mediocrity. It is too short. So I always say, and I use this quote a lot on the show, if it's not bringing you joy or moving you closer to your goals, don't do it. Don't buy it. Don't work there. Don't date it. Don't marry it. Whatever. It's just, you can't, if you're not happy.
Why are you there?
Why are you there?
Right.
And I think that goes, and a lot of people are like, what's a job? Then go find, there are a lot of jobs. There are companies out there right now that are dying for people to come work with them. So, to Deborah's point about employees, she's owned several companies and she's like, make the employees feel invested.
Right.
And I feel like if they can ask that about themselves and be bought in, if we could I think we can all find a company or place we can be bought in.
Well, and we could talk for hours more on this, on ways to do that as the business owner.
Yes.
Or as the business director, business manager, leader, et cetera. Like
Tons
there are
of
ways to do that. But as that owner, that leader, that manager, et cetera, you have to be willing to ask that same question of, what am I willing to help change?
Yep.
And who am I? More importantly, who are we right now? Is that really what we want to be?
I agree. I absolutely agree. Well, Derek, thank you. And we're going to have you back again because we're going to do a whole nother episode on LinkedIn because we've had a lot of questions about LinkedIn. But thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing. Go keep the peace. I'll go disrupt some things while we're doing it. And as always, thank you guys for listening to the Renew podcast. And we will be back with you again next week for another new episode of Renew.